afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to our Horizon 2055 seminar series with Iscia. Today is seminar number 15 after a short break, and I am so delighted today to introduce and welcome Dr. Belinda du Plooy from NMU with her talk entitled Dystopias of Hope. So I don't know if Belinda knows, but I'm actually a fan. And Belinda, her contribution to higher education is so extensive, I can't really cover it all, but we're talking nearly 30 years of experience under her belt, where she's held various roles across several different institutions. Belinda's academic background is characterized by an equally impressive array of qualifications in both public relations and in literary studies as well. And Belinda, you describe yourself as a biblio and cinephile, self-confessed. And in today's talk, Dystopias of Hope, I believe you're going to be talking to us on what George Miller's 2015 futuristic action film Mad Max Fury Road says to those of us who feel we are living in and I quote, dramatically neurotic and paranoid wasteland state of polycrisis, which is something I can certainly relate to, as well as, on the flip side, how the art of narrative may help to redeem us. So, Belinda, without further ado, I'll pass over to you and look forward to what you've got to say about Dystopias of Hope.
Thank you, Emma, for that very, very kind introduction. I'll just share my screen. Let's just see if we can get this going. From the beginning. Can you see my screen in the right way? Sorry, can somebody just tell me if they can see my
Sorry,
screen?
Belinda, yes.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Then I'll go from there and I will just do that. Okay, so as Emma said, I'm going to be chatting and sharing some ideas about George Miller's Mad Max Fury Road, which was hit our screens in 2015. Now just oh my it seems as if my slides don't want to move. Why are my slides not moving?
Oh, there we go. Maybe just a lag. It is, yeah, Friday afternoon.
Yes, everybody's tired, even the computer. Okay, so just a bit of a disclosure. I'm going to be presenting a couple of ideas, which has already been published. It was published in the Journal of Gender Studies in 2019. And I'm going to be condensing and extracting from the larger article. So if anything that I say doesn't quite feel as if it makes, cohesive sense, then it's quite a lengthy article and it's a very dense film. So one can always go back, to that. Okay, so just as a bit of a background, Mad Max, the series of Mad Max films that we have seen, 5 of them in total, is the is the product of writer, director, and creator George Miller. He was born and raised in Australia. And he, after school, qualified as a medical doctor and practiced as a medical doctor as well, along with his twin brother, who was also a medical doctor. And what he saw in the emergency rooms of the Australian hospitals where he practiced as an intern upset and traumatized him so much that he actually used his interest in filmmaking, which was kind of a hobby sideline, to kind of informally work through his own trauma. And that led him to write, create, and direct the first of the Mad Max films. Oh, there we go. So So he created the first Mad Max film, which hit the screens in 1979. Now, if you think back to 1979, this was kind of nearing the end of the Cold War, but wasn't quite during the Gorbachev, glasnost and perestroika era yet. So the idea of nuclear warfare and annihilation was very much still in the imaginary of the world at that time, as it now is again. So he created the first Mad Max film in 1979. It was a breakaway hit, which nobody ever expected it would be, which prompted a second movie, which was released in 1981 called The Road Warrior, which follows Mad Max on his journey through the post-apocalyptic dystopian landscape of the wasteland. And then that prompted a 1985 film, Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, which if we're of a certain kind of age, that's probably the one that we remember best. So in a space of nearly 5 years, a little bit over 5 years, this trilogy about the wanderings through this post-apocalyptic landscape in Australia of this traumatized man, just became completely viral, a word that they wouldn't have used then, but, is obviously part of our discourse today. Um, then there was a 30-year hiatus. And in the 30 years, George Miller did many other things. He made The Witches of Eastwick. He made Lorenzo's Oil. He made the two Babe films, if you remember the movies about the little pig. He made the Happy Feet animated movies. And then in 2015, but during this time, he remained obsessed with the narrative and the story of Mad Max and the world building, the world that he created in the wasteland. So in 2015, 30 years later, after the last Thunderdome movie, he gave us Mad Max Fury Road, which was the continuation of Max's story, but it was also an introduction to a new character, Imperator Furiosa, played by Charlize Theron. And then in 2024, last year, there was a fifth movie, Furiosa. Now, Furiosa is a prequel to Fury Road. It tells the story of Furiosa when she was a child. She was trafficked and stolen from her home. Um, so I will be speaking mostly about Mad Max Fury Road because even though the sequence of the movies is as you see it on your screen at the moment, the culmination of the narrative actually is Mad Max Fury Road, which is the 2015 film for which George Miller received 6 Oscars very deservingly. Um, oh, it's taking a while to next. There we go. Okay, so as you can see from the titles, he plays a lot with the idea of fury and madness, as in all of its different incarnations, irrational anger, violence, punishment, madness as irrational, reckless behavior, chaotic activity, confusion, and of course, mental health. And for both of the two characters, Max and Furiosa, that is largely PTSD. Um, then there are also three concepts, kind of around which we need to think. In terms of the film, it's a post-apocalyptic narrative. So it's set in catastrophic, it relates the catastrophic events after civilization has been destroyed. It's a dystopian story, a bad place, literally the meaning of dystopia. So it's an imagined world or society in which people lead wretched, dehumanized, and fearful lives. And then also it's a kind of subliminal, theme underneath all of this is Ragnarok, or in German Gotterdammerung. from Norse mythology. George Miller, like one of his, great heroes, Tolkien, in Lord of the Rings, folded back to Norse mythology. Um, and the idea of Valhalla, especially, is very virulent in Fury Road. So he folds back to Norse mythology and the idea of Ragnarok, which is catastrophic events, the twilight or the doom of the gods, the destruction of the cosmos, but it also implies cycles of rebirth, the initiation of cycles of rebirth. So the first three Mad Max films, I'm not going to speak too much about them. This is just a summary. The first film was made on a very low budget. It was a B-grade schlock horror film, but it resonated with the zeitgeist of the time and soon achieved cult status. The first three Mad Max films are often seen as defining of Generation X machismo, and even as early signposts of the millennial crisis in or of masculinity. They're also often read as a part of a backlash against the gains of second wave feminism, what today would possibly be called toxic masculinity. They are criticized for depicting violent masculinity as a social disease and patriarchy as a death cult. The films are termed Australian Gothic, recognizably Australian, but with transnational and global appeal. And that Gothic aesthetic also carries over into the steampunk aesthetic that's very much a part of the Mad Max kind of environment. The films depict gendered bodies, dismantled bodies, mutilated bodies, diseased bodies, and reconstructed bodies. Bodies here denoting both the physical and the social body. The films play with limits and liminality, transgressions of boundaries, symbolic hauntings of places, spaces, peoples, and memories, nostalgia, grief, loss, and longing, often the longing for belonging or the longing for a mythic past. The films are often read for their depiction of the performativity of gender, presenting masculinity as drag, as pastiche, and as parody, particularly in conjunction with automotive subcultures and associated iconography and paraphernalia. Max Rokitansky, the main character, and also Furiosa, who we have in the last two films, represent a reconfigured savior or hero myth. And George Miller has often said that he was greatly inspired by Joseph Campbell's seminal The Hero with a Thousand Faces, as was George Lucas as well, when he made Star Wars, which was released just 2 years before Mad Max. Max is also a quintessential anti-hero in the style of the 1960s Man with No Name in Sergio Leone's Italian or spaghetti westerns. The first three Mad Max films have been called westerns on wheels. It's also very important that the landscape in all of these films is a character in and of itself, which is also redolent of the Western. And it's been thought of as being futuristic equivalents to the historic male genre of the Western, where cars substitute for horses, and it's been called revitalized Westerns. So those are the first three Mad Max films that were produced in the 1980s. And then 30 years later, Miller gives us Fury Road in 2015. And it's been said that both Miller and Mad Max here re-enters the cultural bloodstream in a particularly virulent way with an iceberg of a script. Now, that's ironic because there was no script, which is, something that has become Hollywood legend. And there is also very little dialogue in the films. And with that, Miller folds back to old silent movies, which was a very big inspiration to him. He thought of the film as a silent movie with sound. That's a different kind of conversation. So with Fury Road, he introduces a corrective to the earlier three films in terms of their reductive depictions of the relations between men and women, while avoiding an equally reductive representation of gendered shame and blame. It engages, the Fury Road film engages with the complexity of patriarchy and considers alternative possibilities. The message is clearly about collaboration and cooperation as essential for the redemption of a world in which gendered inequalities and abuse of power remain deeply disconcerting obstacles. The film's own redemption of the masculinist, even misogynist, Mad Max mythology of the 1980s lies in the fact that it critically interrogates its own predecessor premises from the first three films, thus providing a new lens through which to view the evolution of its main characters and their dystopian societies. George Miller has himself called Fury Road a simple morality tale. Horizons and landscapes of the imagination. Mad Max is an example of post-apocalyptic world building, like few other um, uh, examples we can think of, short of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. And it's set in the wastelands after a nuclear event. These are the horizons, these are the landscapes in which Mad Max and Furiosa live and try to survive. That is a nuclear electric storm. That is kind of the deus ex machina, maybe the deus ex natura of the film. But we are made very much aware of the fact that Furiosa specifically comes from places that would have looked like this and that. And in the last film, we see scenes of her as a child in what she calls the green place of many mothers, from which she was stolen and trafficked. And what is often forgotten is that Max himself also comes from this place. And in the first film, we see scenes of him with his wife and his child at the beach. It's about companionship, collaboration, family, health. So we tend to forget that that's also where he comes from. Then his wife and child, and this is the pivotal moment in the first film, his wife and child are killed on the roads of Australia, which he is supposed to protect. He's a traffic cop, basically. They're killed by psychotic gang of bikers. And that pivots him into becoming the vengeful road warrior, which he then is through the rest of the movies. And in the first three movies, Mel Gibson portrayed that role. So he completely he eventually finds the Knight Rider, who is the person who killed his wife and child. He exacts bloody revenge on him, but at that point he is dissociated so much that he cannot return to society, and then he becomes this vigilante. So it's very easy to fall into the trap of reading this as binaries. With here it's Tom Hardy as in the fourth movie as Max, representing annihilation, destruction, the wasteland through which Max wanders, and on the other as masculinity, and then on the other hand as femininity or femaleness, Furiosa, the green place of many mothers, where she was trafficked from. That is a trap. Because the deep irony is that Max, and he's only ever called Max in the titles of the movies. Never in the films is he actually called Mad. He's never called Mad Max in the films. Max always presented an alternative to abusive or toxic hegemonic masculinity, and violence in all the movies is always presented as equal to tragedy. In the first film, Max is depicted as a faithful husband, a caring lover, an adoring father with endearing, kind, and mutually supportive relationships with everybody around him. In himself, he already contains the aspects of goodness, which is required of a hero. In the later movies, even as a widower, after his wife's death, he is still faithful and honorable and true to the commitment and community and companionship. But before the tragedy of his loss, he was also shown as a very good communicator, which is so different from the post-traumatic stoic pre-verbal road warrior that he later becomes. He even in the first film says to his wife that he wants to be different from his own father, who was possibly a Second World War veteran, if we really speculate, who was unable to communicate and express himself. So the tragedy of Max's story, as with most heroes, is that he is at the mercy of fate, conditions outside of his control, and that his own choices, good actions, and good intentions cannot inure him against unjust tragedy, loss, and grief. His innocence and naivete is what is also his appeal, and his loss is the existential loss of certitude, the realization of one's vulnerability and of the precarity of life and of living. Ironically, the extent of his psychological degeneration is then possibly due exactly to the healthy, non-abusive masculinity he had internalized before the vicious killing of his family, because what has been lost, the healthy interconnectedness, is so great. Even after his degeneration, in every scenario that Max is presented to the viewer, he is against every form of abusive or tribalistic type of masculinity. So I argue, and this is my argument, that Max and Furiosa in Fury Road should not be seen as binaries, as opposites, battling it out. I argue for a different reading of the protagonists, namely as traumatized mirror images or alter egos of one another, thus aspects of the same subjectivity. So rather than oppositional binaries, I read them as shattered halves of the same traumatized subject who must reintegrate on the heroic psychic inner journey across the symbolic road of fury, implying here anger, madness, and hell, to arrive at, return to a new/old place of potential integratedness and holing and healing, not only for the individuals, but also for their community. And there are a number of instances that, that from the film that I use as substantiation for, for this reading. Most of them contain moments in which the I becomes a we. Max turns away from his lone warrior, kind of position, and he throws his allegiance in with Furiosa and her band of ragtag, people who flee Immortan Joe. And also the postscript of the movie speaks to the viewer. It says, where must we go, we who wander the wasteland in search of our better selves? So the idea for me is that the two of them found their better selves, found their mirror images in one another, and that became kind of an experience of holing or healing. We also see them when they're presented in the very first time we are introduced to them in Fury Road, and the first time we see Max. We see him next to his car, which is the Interceptor, with his back towards the viewer, looking out over the wasteland in front of him. And moments later, we're introduced to Furiosa with her back to the viewer, next to her war rig, looking away from the viewer, with Immortan Joe's insignia branded into her neck, very clearly. So we're introduced to them in the same way as well. And both of these people are obviously, both of these characters are the products of trauma. Max is quintessentially the PTSD sufferer, marked by emotional numbness, flashbacks, delusions, hysteria, disconnection, hyperarousal, and fight or flight responses. He is a man in distressing pain caught in a world of nightmare reality. So having cycled along with Max through the first three films of nihilistic memory, trauma, and devastation, the viewer is then in the fourth film introduced to Imperator Furiosa, who is even more stoic and pre-verbal than Max, and who narratively functions as his alter ego or a mirror to Max. And mirroring is incredibly important. The use of mirrors in the film is, tracking that is quite interesting. but also the idea of speculative fiction, speculation. It all goes back to the Latin word speculum, which is a mirror. So the mirroring of the two characters and the mirroring of, that happens throughout the film is quite significant. So as her name, Imperator Furiosa, signifies, she too is wounded by madness, both in the sense of anger and psychological distress, being the victim of kidnapping and trafficking when she was a child and living then as a gladiator in the army of Immortan Joe. The mirroring of these two displaced and traumatized characters and their mutual recognition of themselves in each other signify a redemptive quality of the film. Once they recognize themselves in the other, they're also able to release the other and subsequently release themselves. So the overarching leitmotif of the entire Mad Max series of films is redemption. Having been implied in the early trilogy, it is made explicit in the fourth film, Fury Road, where the male and female incarnations meet and unite in a battle for sanity and survival. This is what Max and Furiosa, broken and dismantled, traumatized individuals, potentially get right in their relationship with one another. Redemption and co-creation of meaning and purpose, loving the other more than the self, to honor and serve without destroying either the self or the other. Arguably, this is in fact loving the other as the self and the self as the other. It's the brotherhood of humanity, which brings some measure of healing and reintegration into these traumatized characters. Whether this can be sustained is a question that Fury Road leaves tantalizingly open-ended. As Max and Furiosa separate at the end of the film with a shared nod of acknowledgement to indicate, as it were, that all is good and all will be well, rather than continuing their journey more predictably as a union. So the romantic happily ever after is impossible for Max and Furiosa because they are the same allegorical subject and subjectivity. Her ascension is also his, and his return to the world and his continued wandering is also hers. It's about simultaneity rather than exclusivity. It's about continuity rather than resolution. They're two parts of a whole that reintegrated in the wasteland, simultaneously holding on and moving on. Past and future, grief and hope. One without the other would be devoid of meaning and of purpose. So having violently exacted his revenge at the end of the first film, but having regressed too far into himself and away from community with other people, Max becomes the anonymous road warrior of the second film and the later ones, divested of an identity, a name, and any sense of belonging. It's only in the fourth film, Fury Road, that he names and reclaims himself again, after earlier refusing to tell Furiosa his name when she asks what she should call him. She then decides to call him Fool. At the climax of the film, Max offers his name like a gift of communion to Furiosa, along with his blood, as he saves her life with a transfusion, when he says, "Max, my name is Max, that's my name." Having disremembered himself for so long, he re-remembers and reclaims himself again in this mirroring communion with Furiosa, his alter ego, his other self. It is simultaneously the moment of self-discovery and self-revelation. It's also the moment of the consummation of sacrificial love. After Max punctures dying Furiosa's lung to let her breathe freely, and he gives her his blood to save her life. The exchange of blood symbolizes their recognition of their sameness and their interdependency. Transfusion signals transformation. For the viewer, it also carries the realization of the desperate need for humanity to respond more appropriately to the challenges and trauma of what often feels like an increasingly dystopian and nihilistic world. And it's only at this point, which is very close to the end of the film, that one realizes, that the viewer realizes, that the entire film has been narrated by Max, the stoic, non-verbal, basically non-functional human being. Right at the beginning of the film, we are introduced to this narrative of his reintegration, of his return to life by his own voice. So there's a voiceover in his voice, and it starts with the first words of the film recognizable words other than, kind of static chatter in the background. The first recognizable words are, my name is Max. He claims himself, he owns himself. And then he says, my world is fire and blood. Once I was a cop, a road warrior searching for a righteous cause. As the world fell, each of us in our own way was broken, was broken. It was hard to know who was more crazy, me or everyone else. I am the one who runs from both the living and the dead, hunted by scavengers, haunted by those I could not protect. So I exist in this wasteland, a man reduced to a single instinct, to survive. So this is retrospectively him speaking his own story in a voice that he has found again, which had been lost to him. Then I also just want to mention the idea of witnessing. So the phrase witness me forms a refrain to the battle cry of the war boys in the film, and is a call they send out to one another as they engage in life-threatening acts in an attempt to enter and be reborn in Valhalla. Not only must they prove themselves to one another and to Immortan Joe in order to self-identify and be identified by their war tribe as worthy warriors, they must also earn their place in Valhalla. The war boys' obsessive cry of witness me stands in stark contrast to the silent recognition, the true witnessing, shared by Max and Furiosa. This witnessing is, however, not each other's heroism, but of each other's desperation, pain, tragedy, and suffering. So following the gaze and the development of the gaze between these two characters throughout the film is very interesting. Their initial sighting of one another happens during the desert chase, as the war boys pursue an escaping Furiosa. Furiosa's war rig and the battle vehicle on which a muzzled Max is mounted like a hood ornament, crucified, end up level and parallel with one another. Both Max and Furiosa look towards the other's vehicle, a crash being imminent, and amid the chaos see one another, really see one another. Both are stoically astonished at the sight of the other. In disbelief, their gazes hold one another for the briefest of moments as they attempt to compute and understand what they are seeing. Then the vehicles veer away from one another as the chase continues. This initial sighting, the initial gaze, is the eye of the storm, the calmness of recognition, even if understanding only comes later amid the fury of chaos that surrounds them. The visual narrative of the unspoken, or possibly the unspeakable, builds throughout the rest of the film with moments like these. As they exchange gazes, and you can see initially there's that incredible fight that they have where they are gazing at one another in hostility as enemies, and in the end they gaze together towards a common enemy. That's another example. And then the moment when he gives her his blood and saves her life. These images culminate, the gaze that they exchange throughout the film, culminate at the end of the film, back in the Citadel, when the final gaze, when a mere nod is exchanged as Max retreats into the crowd while Furiosa ascends with her new band of women disciples to overturn the rule of Immortan Joe. Okay, so I want to share with you a couple of thoughts about how Fury Road referentially folds back to mirrors, and I've already indicated how important mirroring is, to prior dystopian warning calls by great artists. And George Miller himself has said that Fury Road is reminiscent of epic poetry. Okay, so there is the idea of memento mori, which is the idea, remember that you must die. Skulls are often used to indicate this. I know many of us carry skulls tattooed on our bodies, and skulls and death and images of death, that is what the whole Mad Max film, and specifically Fury Road, is about. Then there's also the idea of the danse macabre, which is a medieval allegory highlighting the universality of death and the fact that everyone is eventually led to the grave. We're all engaged in a dance. It goes only one way. And when you really look at the choreography of Fury Road, you will see that it is a dance. From the fight scene that Max and Furiosa have to the polecats, who's something which is something like, Cirque du Soleil with chainsaws, the vehicles, the formation of the vehicle, everything is a dance. It's a ballet that is presented to us. So the entire film is a dance macabre. And then there is the idea of the ship of fools, which originally comes from Plato's Republic, which is the idea of a group of people caught on a ship, again, an allegory of a ship, where the steersman is blind and it's absolute chaos. Nobody is steering in the right direction. It's complete, chaos. They're trying to make landfall. They're trying to find a space to start a new life. But they are not working together. They are working at cross purposes. So all of these ideas. And then, of course, the Ship of Fools, when you think of Furiosa and her ragtag band of people that she has in her war rig, that she moves, across the wasteland, that is a ship, moving across the desert in and of itself. It also reminds of many other ship images, the prison hulks of the Victorian era, overcrowded land jails were the problem of overcrowded land jails was solved by putting prisoners on ships. If anybody who's read Great Expectations will remember, Pip's story starts with that. Also the coffin ships, the people who fled the Irish potato famine to the New World, to America, escaped on what was called coffin ships because of the high mortality rate. And then, of course, the Atlantic slave trade. Slavery is central to the idea that Miller is communicating. Both Furiosa is a slave. The wives that she steals are slaves. Max essentially is a slave. He's trying to escape Imperator. He's trying to escape Immortan Joe. So all of those iconography, the ideas of ships and slaves and so on is central. Then he also Miller lends from Edvard Munch's The Scream of Nature, which we mostly know as The Scream, but the full title is The Scream of Nature, which was painted in 1893. The original title is Norwegian title is Skrik, which translates, more appropriately to cry or shriek. And in the moment where Furiosa realizes that the green place of many mothers to which she is fleeing and to which she is thinking she's taking the wives of Immortan Joe, the moment she realizes that does not exist anymore, she falls to her knees, rips off her bionic arm, falls to her knees and screams, on the sand dune into, the sky. And there he lends very much to, from Munch's The Scream. He also lends quite a lot from Hieronymus Bosch's The Garden of Earthly Delights. And if you look at the panel, the dark panel, on what is my right-hand side, you'll see that figure on stilts over there, which we can also see in Dali. And in the film, when the group that Furiosa leads moves through what she thought was, or what was supposed to be, the green place of many mothers, it has become toxic. It has become a salt lake where nothing grows, only crows, and there are only dead trees. And you can see the images of the characters there, people on stilts, very much from the absurdist work of Dali and also much earlier from Bosch. And then there, of course, is the subliminal references to Shelley and his famous poem Ozymandias, which was written in 1818, about the fall of empires and civilizations. Everything needs to, eventually be destroyed and come to an end. In the same year, his wife, Mary Shelley, wrote Frankenstein, about monsters and creatures and who creates what, and the real monster is on the inside, not on the outside. And then about 40, 50 years later, there's William Blake's very famous Songs of Innocence and Experience, London. He's speaking to the industrialization, mechanization, urbanization, and the consumption. That was both the sickness, but also the consumption of goods. That was so much a part of the problem of Victorian London and the industrialization era. He also folds back, very notably to the 1920s poem by William Butler Yeats, The Second Coming, which was written just after the First World War, speaking to the devastation of war. And everybody knows the quote, things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world, the blood-dimmed tide is loosed and everywhere, the ceremony of innocence is drowned, the best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. And then what rough beast, its hour come around, at last slouches toward Bethlehem to be born, to be born. That's the second coming, coming of the Antichrist. Which here is war and pestilence and devastation, everything that came with the First World War for Yeats. And then, of course, there is the wasteland. So all of the ideas that I've just presented all boils down to some kind of wasteland, responding to some kind of sense of decay. And Eliot wrote The Wasteland in 1922. 1922 was one of the most important years in literary history, as you will see there from the examples of what else was published in 1922. And then The Wasteland for Eliot is the post-World War I modernity. For Mad Max, it's the post-nuclear dystopia. But the idea of the wasteland, this landscape, this horizon, provides a grammar and a symbolism for the recurring mythic condition that defines the death of the divine order, of the self, of the king. It goes back to, the Middle Ages, and even before that, and then the ensuing chaos. And there's also a yearning for rebirth that goes with that. Now, these images on your screen at the moment, if you think about that salt flats, that was depicted, these images that you're looking at now are actual photographs of the Somme, which was the most devastating battle of the First World War. And if we just look at the figures at the bottom of the screen, 22 million people died during World War I. 9.5 of those were military. 23 million more were wounded, and 8 million were permanently disabled. That is the wasteland. That is the devastation. During which so much of the literature and the imagery that inspired George Miller, comes from. And then, of course, immediately after the First World War, there was the Spanish flu, the 1918 so-called Spanish flu, which claimed nearly another 50 million deaths, according to statistics, depending on what source you look at. So when you think of those images of the Somme, the wasteland that created, and then again, this is not the clearest image, but that is how he borrowed from it. Okay, I'm getting near the end. And then, of course, there are many, many more, examples that I can mention. But it is also, Mad Max's story is also an odyssey, very much like Homer's Odyssey. And so he folds back not only to Norse mythology, but also to Greek mythology. And what I want to end with is just to mention the idea of the myths of Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods to give to humans, and he was punished by the gods, by Zeus, for that, for giving fire to humans. He was punished by being chained to a rock. And having an eagle pluck out his liver every day, and then every night his liver would grow back. And then in the morning, in the new day, the eagle would come and pluck out his liver all over again. That cycle, that also is the cycle of trauma, the reliving of the trauma. And then Pandora was the first human that was created by the gods. They gave her a jar, not a box, a jar, in which all the evils of the world were contained, and she was told not to open it. She, of course, went ahead and opened it, and all the evils escaped. Um, and as she tried to close it again, the only thing that was remained, the only thing that remained was hope. The only thing that remained in the jar was hope. So that leads us to the question, and here I kind of cycle back to the ending of your last discussion, which I heard but wasn't part of. What was hope doing in a jar of evil in the first place? So is the imprisonment of hope inside the jar a benefit for humanity or a curse? If hope is another evil, then we should be thankful that hope was withheld. But if hope is good, the one mitigating force left to us is that it is up to us to choose how to utilize it to our best benefit. And that also takes me back to a moment in the film in which Mad Max says to Furiosa, this is the moment in which they decide to turn back, stop fleeing from the destruction of Immortan Joe, to go back and to retake the Citadel. And Max says to Furiosa, hope is a mistake. If you can't fix what's broken, you'll go insane. So this folds back to your earlier conversation, and I think it was the last seminar about hope, in which you spoke about Sisyphus. Camus, famously, the end of his very short musing he's not, about Sisyphus says, the struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy, which is very, very difficult to do, I must admit. And then one thing that you didn't mention in your last discussion when you spoke about hope, which was quite surprising to me because this is the first quote that comes up in my mind, is the famous poem by Emily Dickinson, "Hope is a thing with feathers that perches in the soul." And this again prompted me to think about Erin's image in her presentation of her stick figure and the little shrike that perched on top of that, man-made, of natural, products, of wood, that little shrike that sat on top of this structure. And I think that is where I've got much more to say, but I think that is where I'm going to stop. And then all I can say to you is thank you for witnessing me. And then I will stop sharing so that we can have some comments. Okay.
Oh, so wonderful. Thank you so much, Belinda. Yeah, that's a brilliant journey, and it goes a lot deeper than I was originally thinking because I haven't actually seen the movie Fury Road. But to my credit, or to my defense, I should say, I only watch maybe 2 or 3 movies a year. So and that's the one that I've missed. But I think I'm gonna download it and I'm gonna watch it. Um I'll give everybody a chance to comment, obviously, and ask questions or have a conversation. I can see hands are being clapped and all sorts. Um, that was so fabulously rich and deep. Um, this theme of hope amongst the wasteland, I think, is such a pertinent one because I personally am quite guilty of always focusing on the problems and sort of getting drowned or overwhelmed um, by some of the issues that this series has in its entirety has sort of drawn attention to. But I can never stay down for long. I'm always yanked back to my senses, and it's always with that comes a sense of hope. So I'm quite intrigued about this interplay or this dance that you're talking about between hope and the wasteland, or hope in the wasteland, and perhaps the danger of it, particularly at the end when you talked about why was hope in the jar of evils. Um, so I just quickly want to read you this from Stephen Jenkinson. He's from the Orphic Wisdom School. He worked in palliative care for like 30 years, and then he went on to become an author, writer, poet, and such. But he wrote this, and I never used to understand it until maybe now. He said, hope is very often a refusal to know what is so, and steadfastly, it is a refusal to live as if the present moment is good enough and all we really have. Hopeless is the collapse of that refusal, and it looks a lot like depression.
Mm.
And when he wrote that, he was talking about in relation to, in particular, the context of death and dying and people meeting their end and refusing to do so, refusing to acknowledge that death was coming, that suffering and endings happen. And he was very much an advocate of um, not just accepting death and violence and decay and destruction and wasteland, if you like, as inevitable, but also embracing it and almost loving it in the sense that a deep acknowledgement of memento mori, or I too shall die, or this too shall end, is that that's supposed to instill a sense of gratitude, I think, and a sense of cherishing of the moment, the present moment, as it actually is. And yet in everyday life, I personally find that that's a constant challenge. So that was a really long-winded way of saying thank you so much for drawing attention to such deep issues and to do it in such a interesting way through a movie as well. And I've got so much respect for George Miller now. I had no idea who George Miller was. Um, I'm going to come back. I've got lots I want to say, but I'm going to give other people a chance. I see Richard's got his hand up. I don't know if anyone else had their hand up first. I'll quickly check Belinda. And then, yeah, I'll ask my question once other people have had a chance. Richard, would you like to go ahead?
Hi, Belinda. Hi. Yeah, yes, thank you for a very interesting presentation. Yeah, I'm going to say I agree with you about your interpretation in the middle there about hope. Um, Marcel, I hope in thee for us. And exactly what you said, they found, and you talked about them encountering each other and 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 so yeah, I just like to say that, yeah. And also about yes, sort of, loving each other and all that sort of things. That's what hope is about.
Richard, you're
Um,
breaking up.
okay,
Do you
for the
want to just
Pandora
turn your
story,
video off?
yeah, right. Okay,
It might be easier than to hear you.
there.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, so yeah, Gabriel Marcel says yeah, the highest expression of the verb I hope is I hope in thee for us. Okay, and it's all about love and fraternity or brotherly love and all that sort of stuff. And hope and salvation. So I agree with you that that's Max and Furiosa that they find salvation in each other. Okay, and then Pandora. Okay, yes, in the philosophy of hope, there is the points exactly that you raised. Okay, so he says that hope is the worst of all evils, because it remains in the jar. And if it's a jar of evils, and the one thing inside it must be the worst of all evils. But then there's that other interpretation that you forwarded, that's because the hope is still inside. It's up to us to to make up our minds. And then finally, quickly, because I've got another thing to attend to. Camus and the myth of Sisyphus. I truly believe he's got it all back to front. Okay, the pushing up the rock, that's all done in hope. Okay, and when it rolls back down the hill, okay, when he goes down back to fetch it, that's exactly what hope is. Okay, so yeah, I just those are my comments for now. Thank you very much. It was a very good presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. I appreciate that. Yeah, I also think that hope is, the interpretation of hope is something that grows. It's not static. At different times in your life, hope will mean different things to you. And I mean, at different times when you read the myth of Sisyphus, it will mean different things. I've read it in many different, stages in my life, and every time I think, oh, this is not what I thought last time when I read it. So I think it's also the idea of hope being a static thing. That's maybe Emily Dickinson, her idea of hope is a thing with feathers. It flies, it goes in different places. It's not a static thing. And then Emma, maybe just to fall back to what you said, that also speaks to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's final stage of dying, which is acceptance. And that's the acceptance of death, the acceptance of mortality. And we often use the cycle, the cycles of grief that she, spoke about. We apply that to all kinds of, other experience of grief and loss and so on, rightfully so, because it is exceptionally useful. But we forget then that the ultimate acceptance that she spoke about was the acceptance of terminally ill patients. The acceptance was the acceptance of death, that I am mortal, that I will end, that this does not go on. At least not in this lifetime as we can possibly know it. And yeah, and I mean, that is interesting. But I see Gary's comment in the group as well. And I don't know if it really is possible for us as human beings to fully embrace that. Because then, why are we even creating art? Which folds back again to Andrea's original question, right at the beginning, when we started with the seminars. How does art serve us in imagining a future? And if we kind of embrace the idea that the species is ending, that there is no future, that this is it, then why create art? Why speak? Why be here? Why do anything? And exactly as Richard just posted, we create art in hope. So yeah, I don't have the answers, but it's intriguing to think about that.
Such a pivotal topic at the moment. And honestly, for those of us, for anyone who watches this, who's just been on the Horizon 2055 cityscapes journeys, we saw a lot of dystopian landscapes and processes, I think. And but we also, in amongst it, everybody drew attention to how much hope there was and drive. And it wasn't the hope and drive that I experience or see. Hello, Kat. Isn't actually necessarily about a future. It's in spite of, or it's a core of, for the sake of it. Most of the trees I've planted here, they're probably going to burn in a fire when I'm not here. Or one day when I'm too old to live here, I'm going to have to pass this land over. And it's very likely that trees won't be allowed to exist. But there's so much joy in every moment of them right now, looking around at them. So I guess that's the shift from a a way of thinking that is like in linear time as opposed to thinking about things in cycles. But I mean, honestly, Belinda, I wanted to ask you as a final question because I know we have to tie up and I don't see any other hands up. But what do you do for hope? Because I know what I do. I go and I hang out with the birds and the beasties and stuff. What do you do for hope?
Music and theater and books and art is my space of hope, and children, spending time with children. You know, that really for me is what gives me hope. And it might not be hope for an eternal future that we will continue on, but it at least gives me hope that there is something beyond me. You know, that I am not the center of the universe. I am not all that there is. And even if I end, it might not be the end for all. You know, there's a quote that I don't know who said it, and I might get it wrong now, but there's the quote that says, "A narcissist cannot contemplate the end of the earth or the end of life because that would mean that he would end." You know, something like that. So
Mm.
so that idea that I am not all there is, I am just a part, I will end, but something beyond me will continue to live. And when I mean, I was just, you know, in the privileged position to see a couple of really good stage shows when I was overseas. And you know, that is performances being recreated. It brings the joy, it brings the knowledge, it brings the insight to generation of, you know, I saw La Traviata, you know, and I mean, it's just as beautiful, it's just as pertinent, and it still moves my soul in exactly the same way it would have moved the souls of the people who saw the very first, you know, performance of La Traviata, what, 300 years ago. Yeah, so I kind of that's where I find hope. It's difficult. It's not easy. I have my moments of despair. I'm honest about that. But that's what I go back to.
That's beautiful. I don't think I'm going to taint the end of this seminar with any of my words. That's a gorgeous ending. Thank you, Belinda, for sharing your wisdom with us and your time.
Thank
And
you.
I'm going to download Fury Road.
Please do, and let me know what you think.
I will. Um, Gary's clapping. Eileen's
Thanks,
clapping.
everybody.
I think we'll call it there. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend and afternoon further, and we'll hopefully see you all again next week.
Thanks, everybody. See you next time. Bye.